Hi, I just want to walk through a few important details with regard to what is religion and talking about the definition of religion and how we should study it. This is the Festival of Holi, which is like often accompanied with a lot of paint, powder, colors, and so it's the Hindu Festival of Holi. So we'll be looking at different rituals across world religions over the course of the summer. And so really it's like, why should we study religion? And this is just from the textbook. And so you've already seen this, but it's because, we are religious beings. We believe. And even if you look at the United States, where you see this rise in the religious nuns, the NONES, you still maintain like a 95, 96% of people who believe in God or divine power. And so we are believing things. And what they do is by believing in things, it's helping us to provide meaning, meaning in the world, why we're here, what is our purpose, what happens when we die. And so religion helps us understand and answer those questions, those existential questions. Another thing is to overcome ignorance. And so another reason to study religion in the first place is trying to overcome our ethnocentricity and understands like, different people across the world believe different things. So it's not just the immediate people around us. And so, as I noted earlier, religion is plugged in and tied to so many different aspects of our lives that you can't just take a scalpel and say, I'm going to cut out the religion aspect of culture. Religion permeates every aspect of culture. And so in order to understand cultures, we need to understand religion, which leads us to our third thing of why we should study religion. To comprehend our culture. US is the most religiously diverse nation on the face of the earth, as far as the number of religions represented in the United States. In order to understand politics, you need to understand religion. In order to understand economic policy, oftentimes, and the quote unquote culture wars, religion plays a big part in it. And so we have to understand not only religion, but the history of religion in America to relate to different movements. From the civil rights movement was driven by religion. Dr. Martin Luther King was not only a doctor, he was a pastor. And he grounded a lot of his theories in his biblical studies. And so you have to be able to understand religion to understand culture. And then also to achieve a global perspective, we are, even though we are the most religiously diverse nation on the face of the earth, we're also 70 to 75% Christian, self-identified Christian in the United States, but the world is not. And so there are countries that are predominantly Hindu, countries that are predominantly Muslim, countries that are predominantly Buddhist. And so we have to understand a wide variety of religions to understand a global perspective. And we don't live in our little isolated bubble anymore. And so we are a global society. And so in order to understand society, different cultures, we have to understand how religion functions in those cultures. And then also to help us formulate our own religious beliefs. It's not necessarily about like becoming more spiritual, but it's about, identifying and thinking about it's like, I do believe this. I do believe that. I believe X, I believe Y. And our beliefs have to be able to withstand questioning. And so we have to more foundationally understand why we believe something. And so that's another reason to understand religion. And as I note here, there's a delicate balance of tolerance and spiritual promiscuity. And so on the one hand, you have to be able to note that believing in reincarnation and believing in Christianity, those are at odds at one another. And so what I love Oprah and what she's done for the world, but you can call it the Oprahfication of religious studies. It's these I love this idea and I love this idea and this idea, but those three ideas are not compatible with one another. And so we need to understand that, and we need to then be reflective and discover, what do we think? What do we believe? So that's why we should be studying religion in the first place. That's why you should be happy you're in this class, and why you have to be able to. Not happy in this class because you have to do it, but this class in particular, if you have to take a religion class, this class in particular, Calvin and Hobbes, one of my favorite cartoons. It's great, and thinking about how we define religion. It's like, I don't think math is a science. I think it's religion. A religion, yeah, all these equations are like miracles. You take two numbers, and when you add them, they magically become one new number. No one can say how it happens. You either believe it or you don't. This whole book is full of things that have to be accepted on faith. It's a religion. And in the public schools, no less. Call a lawyer. As a math atheist, I should be excused from this. And so to understand religion, we have to understand like its implication and what is religion, what is not religion. Is math a religion? I don't know. We'll have to come to a conclusion on that. But if we had more time, we would talk about, is sports a religion? Is Macintosh devotion a religion? Can a rave be a religious experience? Can cliff diving be a religious experience? And so these are things that we really want to think about. But should math be considered a religion? But we need to know, because you have a lot of religion in the public school debate about what can and cannot be taught in public schools. And so that's fascinating stuff. Problems of definition. And so this is something, and related to this, why I want to talk about, like with the definitions you submitted. This is the issue, is that you can't be too general and you can't be too specific. And so if you say religion is belief in one God, well, I mean, that eliminates billions with a B, billions of people in the world that it would not be considered a religion of what they believe in. So we can't be too general, though, like, anything you believe in. Well, that opens the door to be okay, I believe in a political philosophy, or I believe that that baseball is a great sport. So it was like, if you say anything you believe in really strongly in, it opens a door to things being religious, being a religion that you might not feel comfortable with. So and so these are reasons we need to define religion, is to set up family resemblances. Okay, it's like what, and define boundaries for what is not religion. So family resemblances, like, okay, if we look at the religions in the world, like what do they have in common? But really, we want to start with the definition of religion. We want to define it and see, okay, what does or does not fit our definition. And so if we talk about a couple different kinds of definition, I think it might be helpful. And so the chapter goes into this, like this difference between the substantive versus the functional definitions of religion. So the substantive definition, explains religion, what religion is, and how it impacts the individual. And so explains religion intellectually. People are religious because ideas strike them as valuable. Religions are about things that have meaning. And these are interpretive rather than explanatory. And so we'll talk about some of the differences in definitions of religion. Eliade, his phenomenological approach to religion is a more substantive approach, when talks about religion is a reaction to something that they consider to be the sacred or the numinous, or like Rudolf Otto talks about, religion is a reaction to the sacred, a reaction to the numinous, something that you consider to be the divine. So that is what religion is. And it's a system of things too. So that's like a substantive definition talks about, like it really gives creates that religion is important, and that people believe religion because they believe in these things. These things are meaningful. A functional definition, what it does is it actually tries to look like, is there something working behind the conscience or behind the consciousness of individuals that make them believe in something? And so these are explanations useful in understanding people. And so we get to a functional definition, and on the next screen, we'll talk about it being reductionistic. That there's a reductionistic definition, like it reduces religion to something else. But for these functional definitions, it's like the compelling forces to act are not the religious ideas themselves, but there's other drives. So for example, Freud talks about religion is a wish fulfillment. We wish it to be true. It's a neurosis. We have this desire, this need as human beings for protection. And when we reach a certain age in our lives, we can't go back and have our parents protect us. And so what we do is we fabricate a god or deity in the sky, and that deity is what protects us. That would be a functional definition. It doesn't really give meaning to what religious believer believes, but says actually something else is going on there. Religion is just providing a function. It's not actually something meaningful. So what we have with these reductionist definitions, so as I mentioned, like Freud being wish fulfillment, okay, these reductionistic definitions are functional. And so it's a social or psychological explanation of religion cannot in itself provide a complete understanding of religion, since it explains religion only as a social or psychic fact. So this just means like it doesn't really mean, it doesn't, these functional or these reductionistic definitions mean that religion is really only providing a service. It's just it's providing a function. It's not real. And that, especially like in Freud's case, like if people get to a point, it's like they should move beyond religion. Emil Durkheim, who's a sociologist, talks about that religion is an expression of the society itself. Marx talks about religion as being an alienation technique, that we alienate ourselves from ourselves. Unfortunately, with the time constraint, we probably won't go into Marx or Durkheim or Freud too deeply, but they are functional. They're functionalists, but also they're reductionistic, because they say religion at its root, it is wish fulfillment for Freud. It's not really meaningful. And so reductionism does not allow for the beliefs to be accepted at face value, but are reduced to some other phenomenon, is really the key there. And this is just expanding the idea of reductionism. You're saying really X is nothing but Y when you get down to it. So religion is nothing but wish fulfillment when you really get down to it. Religion for Emil Durkheim is nothing more than social fact and a need for that society when you really get down to it. And so what happens is like they're not really giving credence to the belief that provides meaning for the individual. It actually clouds what can be considered as religion down the line. So some potential definitions, and you submitted your definition, and we'll talk about those. I'll go back and comment on those after you've submitted them. But this is Geertz's definition. He talks about religion being a system, and it's a system of symbols. So remember, we talked about like with this symbol, like this web of like all of these things that have to be interconnected with one another. The belief has to be connected to the ritual, has to be connected to the creation account, has to be connected to the notion of the afterlife, which has to be connected, it's like the body, it's like the knee bone is connected to, the thigh bone. It's like all of these things have to be connected with one another in a consistent way that's believable. And so what you have is you have a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations. And so the system, it's powerful and pervasive, and it has this religion makes you do something. Religion makes you believe something. Okay, by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence, religion provides meaning for individuals. It sets up the world as we know it. And so in Hinduism, where you have the notion of reincarnation, one life is not all you have. In Christianity, the idea, the general order of existence is that God created human beings with a divine spark in the image and likeness of the divine. And so that sets up an order of existence there. So that's what religions accomplish. And then formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. And so essentially it means like in this fourth one, it means they're believable. It means like that these conceptions are believable. And it actually makes us do these things. And so it's believable, it's a system, it provides meaning, and it motivates us. These four things, I mean, that's what religion does according to Geertz's definition. It's a great definition of religion. Durkheim talks about other definitions. It's a unified system of beliefs and practices. I have asked you to go to the chapter and see some of these other definitions. Livingston combines the above. Livingston says it's a system of activities and beliefs. Okay, we talked about the three B's, like we have like behavior, belonging, or behavior, belief, belonging. And so it's activities and beliefs directed toward that which is perceived to be of sacred value and transforming power. This is a nice middle ground where it's not too close. It's not saying there has to be a divine, there has to be a God, but really it's what is perceived to be of sacred value. And so it keeps the door open for many different kinds of understandings of the sacred. So now we'll talk about the ways of studying religion, and this is just a review of the text. But this is like, again, so think about lenses, and I said this in the intro video. Think about different lenses to use to understand religion. If you view something through a lens, what is that lens going to be? Because it kind of clouds what it is that you're studying. It has an impact on what it is that you're studying. And so if you're coming at from this literary critical view, you have to know what your lens is. And I want you to have a preference on which lens you think is the most appropriate. I mean, I certainly have my preference. So, but these are the different ways that we study religion. And so literary criticism is really focused on religious texts. That there's a universality of sacred texts in religions. I wouldn't say universality, but there's a vast majority, I guess you could say, of sacred texts. And so you could look at the text. But here's the question. Who were the texts written for? When were they written? Where were they written? Who wrote them? What kind of a genre are they in? Okay, if you look at the Christian Bible, there's all different kinds of genre. I mean, first off, you have the Old Testament, then you have the New Testament. And so the Old Testament itself is a compilation of different texts. Even in Genesis itself, and we'll talk about this when we talk about a creation account, you have two different creation accounts in Genesis alone. So who are these written for? So, and then for later generations, how are they translated? So two different approaches. You have the textual criticism, the lower criticism, documentary criticism, which is higher criticism. And textual criticism, it's really you're talking about the version. Like, it is the text an original version? Is it a later copy? Because what happens with the original version? You have translation, you have edits that they can't be perceived. You have changes in things. You have, well, it was written in one language, and now we're trying to translate to another. And when we make choices about how we translate things, in the Bible, if we talk about dominion over all things versus stewardship of all things, how you translate something from the Hebrew into English has a profound impact on the text itself, right, and what the text is trying to say. So that's textual criticism. The documentary criticism is talking about, is the text whole or partial? When is the text written? Where is it? For whom is it written? Why is it written? So if you're looking at Genesis, like who is the audience in Genesis? If you're talking about textual criticism, that's for the documentary criticism. You talk about who is the audience, and textual criticism, you're like, what are these? Is this the original? And biblical scholars will say it's like that Genesis was written by 4 different people. There are 4 different authors. So it's a crazy it's a very fascinating thing to study, because you have these texts that have been taken as quote unquote gospel that have been that have changed over time, or there's translated over time. And so what the literary critic wants to do is understand the context of that approach. You have historiography, which is the history and development of religions over time. And so there's problems with that. So historians will look at, or the historiographical approach. They will look at different approaches and see like, how has religion developed? And here's let's use Christianity for an example. There's a bunch of books that were considered to be the gospel, the 4 gospels. And so there's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas. And so all of these were in consideration by the early church fathers, and they were fathers, so they're all men. Early church fathers said, okay, actually, we're going to pick these 4. We're going to pick Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and that this is the canon, the canon, the canon. The canon of Christianity it's these books. So what's the issue with that? It's like, well, you have with the historical approach is that the victors write the record books, and so you don't have, when you're talking about the evolution of religion over time, you don't have dissenting views that might still last. So historians determine what is important. And can you really know what was going on at the time to be able to interpret the text properly? Because we can only know what people were reporting at that time. So we were not there. There were not TikTok videos about what's going on in 12th century Europe. There were not, when the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, left his palace. I mean, he was actually, raised in a Hindu environment, so what was going on there? Was he really a prince that wanted to leave all these things, or were this just a story? And so, it's hard retroactively to assess those things. And but the historian tries to get at it and try to understand religions through that lens. The anthropological lens talks about human cultures. And here we have a constant interaction between society and the religion in that society. You can't know without knowing the other. We already talked about that. You can't take a scalpel and carve religion out of a culture. It permeates every aspect of that culture. And so some of the early anthropologists, they looked at primitive cultures to try to find out the origin of religion. And so Durkheim argues that religion is reduced to worship of the society itself. It's like, really, religion equals the society. They're one and the same. And he's talking about these closed societies, when these are tribal societies, that religion and society was the same thing. So your religious values was the same as the tribal values, and your obligation was to the tribe, not to the individual. So anthropology looks at, like, how does religion interact with culture, and so sociology looks at, like, the study of social behavior. Okay, how does religion impact other aspects of our lives, or behavioral aspects of our lives? What you could even throw politics in here. It's like, how does religion impact how we make decisions? How does religion impact how we vote? How does religion impact how we relate to one another? And I talked, like, in the text, it talks about Max Weber and the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And he argues that this Protestant ethic of working hard, saving your money, thinking that your job was in honor of the divine. He talked about, like, everybody, the Protestant ethic argued that everybody was a saint, and everyone had an obligation, everyone had a calling, but your calling might not be to the priesthood. Your calling might be to be an accountant. And so your calling is to be the best accountant you can be, and to save your money, and to work hard. So this Protestant ethic contributed to capitalism because it talked about people, like, not being wasteful, about investing, about all of these things that Western and modern capitalism embraces. And so Max Weber argues, it kind of like this Protestant ethic set the grounding for contemporary capitalism in the West. So, and talking about psychology, we have William James and Sigmund Freud, but Gordon Allport also puts his hat in the ring here. And he talks about these differences between the extrinsic and intrinsic religious expressions. And so what he did initially is he was doing a study of bigotry in the South. And what he found was that the people who said they were religious, weren't really all that religious, and they were still bigoted. So he was like, okay, well, let me ask him a couple of other questions. And so he designs a survey where he tries to get, okay, how are people religious, and ask them a bunch of questions, and then ask them, it's like, well, what he found was that people who were extrinsically religious tended to be more bigoted than people who are intrinsically religious. So here's the difference. It's like, he said, he identified, okay, people who are extrinsically religious, what they do is they find religion useful for some other purpose, whether it's for solace or peace, or a chance to socialize, or to increase their social status, or to get a job interview, or to meet a spouse. That they would go to, like, they would go to a church service not because they really, really want to and they want to embrace it, but because their spouse encouraged them to, or their spouse wanted them to, or they wanted to meet people to get a job, or they wanted to use that as their social network. Okay, so that's using religion for non-religious means, I guess you could say, for extrinsic means. But what he found, that people who are intrinsically religious that they internalized the religion so it became the central core of their very being and personality. And so these are people who really authentically live their religion. It's their master motive. And so these are people who are, they say they're religious, but they act on that belief. And they act on it, they live it out. And so he made this distinction, and it's a really impactful for us to be able to understand, okay, what are these differences between beliefs and behaviors, religious beliefs and behaviors? And so what are the kind of things we want to look at when we talk about survey data? So that's the psychology of religion. And the philosophy of religion, really, we're talking about statements of faith versus statements of reason. And so in the book, he talks, Anthony Flew introduces this notion of the falsification principle, which is important for you to know, but I won't review it here. And then the phenomenology, what you have is you have this, really what phenomenology does, it says that the religious experience that people have, it's authentic. And think about phenomenon, okay, that religious, it's an event, okay? And this focuses on the data of experience as it presents itself to consciousness. So what that means is like that this approach, it means when we encounter the sacred, whatever we consider to be the sacred, how do we respond to that? And instead of being a functional definition, instead of being a reductionistic definition, what phenomenology does is it says that whatever your reaction to that interaction with the divine is, that is authentic, and tell me more about it. And so this avoids the reduction of other fields. Rudolf Otto, he talks about, it's like this allows the religious approach, and he avoids reducing it, but he has this notion, it's a Latin notion, he talks about it's called the mysterium tremendum et fascinans. And he calls the sacred the numinous. And what happens when you interact and you encounter the numinous, encounter the sacred, is you have this feeling of being pulled in yet pushed away at the same time. Mircea Eliade, he critiques the efforts of others explaining religion in non-religious terms. So he makes this divide, he makes this distinction between the sacred and the profane. The sacred is that we treat differently, we treat separately. Think of a Bible, or think of a cross. Okay, or in Hindu culture, think of a cow. So there's not one thing that is sacred across all cultures. Okay? But think of the profane. The profane is, while in Hindu culture, the cow is sacred, hamburgers, cows are not sacred in the United States because we eat them. But it's how you interact with the sacred, or what you consider to be the sacred, is really this phenomenological approach to the study of religion. And so the last thing to think about, and I asked you to comment on this, was like, where should we stand when we're reviewing religion? Should we be an insider? Should we be an outsider? And what are the issues with being both? If we want to comment on a religion, do we have to be on the inside? Do we have to be a believer of that religion? And what are the benefits and drawbacks of that? Versus being an outsider, and what are the benefits of drawbacks of that? If we're an outsider, do we really know what's going on? Do we really know what's going on in a particular ritual? If you are an outsider and walk into a Christian baptism and you see people dunking a baby in a tub of water, like, what is going on? They're trying to drown the baby, So, but without understanding the ritual, can you really comment on it? Yet on the insider, could you be so clouded by the belief that you're not really allowing yourself to step out of your own belief system to study it? So that's really a question for you. Is like, what are the issues with both? There's benefits and drawbacks of each. I ask you to identify benefits of each one. But with that, that is all we have, focusing on this chapter. But hopefully this gives a nice overview and fills out some of the reading. With that, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.